Welcome to Ammosmith, and today I'm going to show you how to look for adverse pressure signs in your hand loads. What you're going to need basically is just the cases you fired. I have a few pieces here that have exceeded their pressure limits. And I'm also going to show you how to determine whether or not a case is reusable or not. There's some signs, not all of them are obvious unless you do a couple of steps. So let's get started. Okay, pressure. We all know about pressure. We have to achieve a certain amount of pressure in order to make the bullet leave the barrel. But there are times when that pressure can exceed the allowable limit for the cartridge and firearm combination that you're using. And what I have before you are 5 cases and 4 fired primers. And I'm going to show you what adverse pressure looks like up close and how to determine whether or not a case that you've either picked up at the range or a case in your own inventory has been exposed to extremely high pressure. Okay, one of the first pressure signs you're going to see is what they call a flattened primer. If you look at the cartridge on the left, you'll see a difference between that one on the right. They're both the same cartridge. They're both 220 Swifts. The one on the left started getting a little high pressure. That's when the primer starts to flow out of the pocket of the primer. And if you look at the one on the right, it still has a nice what they call annulus around the primer and the primer pocket itself. If you look, you can actually see that the primer on the left is wider than the one on the right. That's called a flattened primer. And at that point, you realize that you need to back off about a grain or two on the load you're using, or maybe even 3. It depends. And some of the other signs are going to be on the outside of the case as well. Now these are the same cartridges, and although the pressure wasn't on the very extreme side, it can be. If you look down here, you can see at the web of the case what this one here is the same one on the left that had the flattened primer. The web of the case is a little more exaggerated than the one on the right. Okay. Now sometimes if you have excessive pressure, what will happen is the bolt will be hard to open. If you have a stiff bolt lift, as they call it, you really need to either A, quit shooting the ammunition that you've loaded and disassemble it and reduce it by about 5%, or try another one, but you may end up ruining some of your brass. Okay, so that's another indicator. Usually the indicators will come in several forms, sometimes only one at a time. In this case, we really don't see a whole lot of excessive pressure here, but we did see the sign on the primer on the case. Okay, before you I have 2 primers. The one on the left is normal. It's fired. You notice right here that it's nice and rounded. Okay. Now this one has been exposed, the one on the right has been exposed to excessive pressure. They're both large rifle primers. Now this one has a flange in it where it flattened out. I'll try to turn this thing without. And you can, I don't know if you can see it, there's a ridge on it. That's where the primer started to flow into the case. And that is a very excessive sign of pressure. It's not extremely bad, but it's bad enough to where you want to watch what you're doing, because if you exceed your pressure limits, what you're going to do is you're going to overstress the case, which will destroy the case, and you're going to overstress the gun, which will prematurely shorten the service life of the weapon. Okay, I have a cartridge before you. It's a 17 Remington, and you can see the web of the case down here, but look up here. Do you see this right here? That's what they call incipient case head separation. That's a high pressure sign right there for sure. Now this case has been fired several times, and it's at the end of its life, I think. And so what we do is we take a case like that, and what you want to do is put it to the side so you know what to look for. Okay, to determine whether or not you have a bad cartridge case or not, whether you have a blown primer, is you take a brand new primer, like this guy here, put it anvil down to where the outside of the primer, that part of the primer is facing up. Sometimes it's difficult to get them to do what you want them to do. And what you want to do is take your case. Here's a serviceable case. What you want to be able to do is put it over it and add a little bit of pressure. It may pick it up, but it won't fall all the way into the primer pocket. Okay? Now, if you take an unserviceable case, I just push that all the way down on it. That case is unserviceable. And what you want to do is throw it away. In fact, I just tapped the primer right out of it. I'm going to do that again. Watch closely. The unserviceable case will go over the primer and just pick it right up. That case is unserviceable. And it just pops right out. Another sign of high pressure is when you fire the weapon, and like this case here, the one that had the bad primer pocket, what will happen is on a semi-automatic, if you pick the case up, the primer will be gone, and that's bad because it could be inside the action and cause a jam. In a bolt action, what will happen is you'll unbolt the case, and when it ejects, the primer will be left on top of the magazine at times. And then you know you really have some real bad pressure signs. So that's some of the indicators for excessive pressure. Remember, a stiff bolt lift, a flattened primer, which I showed you, and a blown out primer pocket. Those are some of the indicators. Also, you have incipient case head separation. There's another indicator. Not always of high pressure. That could just be the case being worn out. But it will show up in excessive pressure.